I had to go into the hospital a couple of years ago to get my appendix removed. It was like a sudden burst of pain, and the next thing I know, I'm in an ambulance on my way to the emergency room. They rushed me into surgery and fixed me up. They told me they wanted me to stay there for a couple of days so they could make sure I was going to recover. I hate hospitals, but I agreed to their request. They, after all, knew better than I did what was best for me at the time. The first day and night went without incident, although in a lot of discomfort, the pain medications managed to keep me relatively groggy all the time, and I slept for most of the time. The next day, the doctors told me that they were going to lower the dose on the pain medications so I could get used to what I would be feeling when I got home, but to tell them if I felt a lot of pain and they needed to up the dose again. I spent most of that day watching TV and being bored. I even pressed the nurse call button a couple of times just to have some company. I think they knew my requests were silly, but they accommodated me knowing how bored I must be. It had started getting late, around 10 p.m., when I decided to go to sleep. I was tired of being sore all the time and wanted to just get the stay in the hospital over with by sleeping off the last 8 hours. Sometime in the middle of the night, I'm not exactly sure when, I woke up to the room being very cold. To me, hospitals are already a bit chilly to start with, but this seemed a bit ridiculous. I pushed the call button for the nurse to come and see about turning up the temperature, but when I pressed the button instead of the beep that told you that they had been alerted, nothing happened. I tried pressing it a few more times, but it seemed to be broken. I thought about getting up, but they had told me unless necessary to stay in bed so I didn't rip my stitches out, so I figured that I would catch one of them when they walked by the door. I looked over to the thin sliver of light between the door and the frame, and I froze. There on the ground was a young girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, in a hospital gown. She had her legs pulled up to her chest, and her arms were wrapped around her knees. Her black hair hung limply in front of her, covering much of her face. The skin on her arms was white, not just pale, but white. There were only a few places between her hair where you could see her face, or where her face should be. Instead, all that I saw was a blackness. There didn't seem to be any nose, mouth, or eyes. Just black. I probably would have screamed if I hadn't been so scared. I just sat there staring, trying not to make any noises to bring her attention to me. Somehow, I knew she already knew I was there. She just sat there unmoving for maybe a minute, and then she just seemed to vanish. I didn't know what to make of it. When I got back from the hospital, something started happening that really scared me. I would wake up with bruises in odd places all over my entire body. One time, I even woke up with scratches on my arms in a pattern that looked like someone had scratched me. Things around my house would appear and disappear in odd places. I don't really know what I came in contact with in the hospital that night. It might have been a demon or a ghost. Either way, I think that she may have followed me home. I even moved to a different place, but it still seems to be happening. I don't know what I can do to make it stop, or if I'm stuck with her. My mom works as a nurse in a hospital. They have rooms for them to stay in while working extended shifts in case they don't want to go home so they can get as much rest as possible. Each room is shared by 2 employees. My mom had one of her friends that was also a nurse as a roommate. My mother was just coming off a long shift and decided that she would stay the night at the hospital because she had to return in 8 hours to start her next shift. As she worked her shift the night before, she noticed that she was feeling worse and worse. She had a fever and was even more tired than she usually would have been after work. This is one of the reasons why she also decided to stay the night at the hospital. She informed some of the doctors and nurses that she wasn't feeling well and what her symptoms were before retiring to her room. She did her nightly prayers since she is someone who, no matter how sick or busy, will find time to speak to God. Shortly after her prayers, she climbed into bed and fell asleep. Her roommate was working the overnight shift, so my mom was alone in the room and shouldn't have been disturbed all night. Sometime around 1 a.m., my mom woke up to the sound of knocking on the door. Figuring one of her colleagues was there to check on her, she went to the door to see who was there. It was unusual for someone to do this, but since she had told people that she was sick, it wasn't impossible. But why they wouldn't have just let her get some rest seemed odd. When she opened the door, no one was on the other side. She looked up and down the hall, but no one seemed near enough to have accidentally bumped up against it. She shook her head and went back into the room and went back to sleep. She wasn't asleep for more than another 30 minutes when she heard the door to her room open. She never leaves the door unlocked when she is there, but in her delirium of being sick and having been woken up at such a late hour, she figured it was possible that she had left the door open. When she looked up, she saw a man in a white coat walking toward her. He had a stethoscope around his neck, so she figured it was a doctor that was coming in to check on her since she had told people that she didn't feel well. She looked up to his face to see who it was, but it was blurry and she couldn't make out any distinguishing figures. As he got closer to her, she noticed his face began to shift from person to person, but she recognized these people. They were people that she was close to in her life, her family, friends, and the people she worked with. She said that it also felt like the closer the doctor got, the room's temperature seemed to drop lower and lower. By the time he was right next to her, she was freezing. She tried to move off the bed, but it was like she was paralyzed in place. After seeing the face change on this thing that was in her room, she tried to call out, but no sound would escape her lips. The doctor's face seemed to shift a final time into that of a handsome man, and he began to examine her. His hands were like ice as he examined her. When he placed one of his hands on her neck, seeming to check the pulse there, the cold became almost unbearable as the hand lingered. Then he brought his other hand up to her neck, and she felt pressure build like he was trying to choke her. She struggled to take in a full breath as whatever this was continued to squeeze harder and harder. The faces started to shift again to the faces of those she cared about the most, making it seem like these were the people that were trying to kill her. As her vision began to fade, she remembered that she had a necklace with a cross on it next to her bed. She forced her arm to move and started digging through the front pocket, trying to feel for the thin, gold chain. Finally, she felt the familiar strand of metal and pulled it out. The creature, or whatever it was, screamed out in pain and began thrashing about like it had been burned. It took a few more steps back and then seemed to collapse in on itself. The cold in the room seemed to dissipate, and the paralysis slowly abated. When she felt strong enough to get up without falling, she left her room and went next door to where she knew one of her friends was staying the night as well. Needless to say, when she knocked on their door at around 2 a.m., she was a little annoyed at being woken up, but when she saw my mother's face, it was obvious something was wrong. She told her everything. She listened without comment until my mom had finished. After that, her friend told her that she had experienced some strange things herself, both in the room and around the hospital, like lights going on and off on their own, scratching and knocking noises, and sounds coming from empty rooms. These were things my mom had never heard of from anyone else in the hospital. She felt lucky that she had her rosary so nearby when the thing attacked her in her room. The next morning, my mom came home after asking to be relieved for her morning shift. She was too rattled from the encounter the night before and was still feeling sick. When she got home, I was surprised to see her home so early and asked if she was okay. She tried to pass it off like everything was all right, but I knew something was wrong and pressed her further. She finally told me what had happened the night before. I was scared for her. I can only imagine what it would have been like to go through it herself. She now won't go to the hospital without her rosary, and me, I will go to another hospital, any hospital, before the one my mom works at. When I started working at the hospital, one of my favorite people I got to know was Dr. Lewis. He was a kind old man who every patient that came into contact with him just seemed to fall in love with. You always felt that he took his job seriously, and you were in good hands with him. A lot of us that worked with him didn't understand, though, how much it hurt him when he lost someone. Everyone knows that this is a part of the job. Some people seem to recover quicker than others, but it is still hard nonetheless. Near the end of his career, Dr. Lewis started to take the losses a lot harder than most. He would go into a very dark mood for days on end, to the point where he just wasn't the same person we had all grown to know and love. I personally think it is the reason why he decided to retire when he did. It was almost like one day he was there and the next he was gone. He was a man who lived for his work, and unfortunately, he passed away within a couple of months of him leaving medicine. He just lost his purpose, and I think he just didn't have much to live for in his mind. That is where this story begins. It started pretty quickly after his passing that we started to get patients reporting an elderly doctor coming into their rooms to make sure they were okay. They said that they never felt scared or that anything was off when he came in to visit their rooms. The instance I'm going to talk about is something that none of us can really explain. We had a woman come in complaining of a variety of symptoms. We ran every test that we could think of, but we just couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. She continued to deteriorate over the course of a couple of weeks, to the point that everyone had accepted, including herself, that it was going to be over very soon. The next morning she told us that an elderly doctor had come in and told her that he knew exactly what was wrong with her and that she would begin her treatment in the morning. She asked him why he couldn't start right then, and he told her that she wasn't his patient, but gave her the diagnosis that he had made and told her to tell the staff the next morning. When we asked her to describe what the doctor looked like, she gave an almost perfect description of Dr. Lewis, right down to his round-rimmed glasses that we constantly made fun of him for wearing. When we ran the test for what she said, none of us were surprised to hear that it was right on the money. I'm a very spiritual person, and I believe that Dr. Lewis is still looking in on patients even after he has died. I hope that at some point he finds peace, but I know one woman who owes her life to him.
For more ghostly sightings and real creepy hospital stories, be sure to like and subscribe and never miss an episode.